Welcome back to the podcast. Today's guest is McKay Byam. He is the CEO and co-founder of Simtech MD. In the episode, we talk about medical simulations, the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, the ugly, what it was like in medical school. We talk about how people are currently learning to become medical professionals, and some of the strange stories that McKay told me makes me feel a little bit worried about the next time I go to the hospital, but I'm sure we're in safe hands. Stay tuned. And McKay basically tells us all about his company, what they're going to do in the future, how they're utilizing AI as well. So stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and enjoy. Well, I think like the first way to start off is just to say welcome, obviously. And I appreciate your time because I know you're a busy man. There's always a lot going on, especially when you're trying to build a startup, when you're, are you still actually a medical professional? Are you still actually like in the hospital?
Anymore. No, I don't. Okay. Yeah. After we received kind of our first larger investment, at that point, I became full-time.
Yeah. And was that just because of a timing thing that there wasn't enough hours in the day anymore?
Well, it's a little bit of so one, I get consumed by stuff. And so for me, safe practice, it's tough to say that I would remain safe while spending all of my time on something like this. And so part of it was the safety. Part of it was really what the company needed, though. We did need full-time people who were, putting in more hours than they were getting paid. And so, and the last part is that when people put money in on the investment side, they want to know that that is your number one priority. And so that was part of a agreement that, founders that will come across, they'll have vesting agreements for their shares. And so like amount of time they need to be putting in to really qualify for the shares that they're getting as a founder. And so mine was that I'm fully committed to the company. So
I can understand that from an investment side. You don't want somebody to be half in and half out. It just wouldn't make sense, especially when they definitely know the amount of time and commitment that it's going to take to make something work. So, I get that.
I mean, the risk investors are taking. I mean, this is an interesting topic for people, but after going through, a couple investment rounds, from my side now, when I hear people talking about investors getting rich from unicorn companies or startups, I'm like, oh, bless them, make as much as they can. I'm like, because the risk they take, the work that they go through as they've got people clamoring for their money, trying to figure it out, and people that invest in earlier rounds typically they're not larger investors lots of times. They're that friends, family, and as they say, fools, like the triple F, friends, family, and fools round. But they take a bet on what you're doing, and it's an incredible thing that they're doing on their side. So as a founder, so just going through the process, it's changed my perspective on, the investment space. I initially pictured kind of like the Warren Buffetts sitting back, looking at reports, but the startup space is a lot different. They meet you, they get a hunch, they like what you're doing, see your vision, and bet on you, really. So
yeah. And how much help do you have from your investors? Are they like mentor investors as well? Like, do you have somebody that's assigned to you as like like a, what is it called? Like a not like a manager. What
like
is
an
it?
active investor or a mentor or
a mentor? Sorry, a mentor. That's what I'm trying to say.
I mean, lots of my investors have acted as mentors at different stages of my life. I wouldn't say lots, but investors can take different roles. Some are very active. Some will want a board's position, depending on your startup structure. Several of mine have been really active at different phases, and then kind of the need for that has come and gone. And then, we're just starting to kind of scale up our marketing right now. So we're reaching out to one of our other investors. And so it is a pool of people that sometimes have skill sets that can really help you as a company. Not always. Sometimes they're just providing capital. But I've had some really great ones. Yeah.
Okay, nice. And I guess we should give people a little bit of context, because we've actually been, I think, in contact for 3+ years from the first time. I can't remember if you reached out to me or I reached out to you. It was something to do with Sense Glove.
Yeah.
And that was at the time you were raising money, actually, when we first spoke to each other, and you had the idea of wanting to integrate haptics within your trainings. But let's go back further than that. So tell people a little bit about your story, and actually me, because I've realized I don't actually know that much about you apart from what the work you do. So how did you get into medicine? Where did you grow up? And tell me a little bit about you personally.
Yeah. So I grew up in Canada. It was great. And so I did pretty typical pathway. Did my undergraduate degree first, then got into medical school. I did, let me think if there's anything else important in there. No, I had like a really, really good, first start of my life. Terrific. Yeah, couldn't complain. When I got into medical school at that point, a fun fact, I thought I was married and had 3 kids in med school. So that was fun. That was a hard phase, but,
Gotcha.
so 3 young kids, as you can imagine. And
Yeah.
so now our kids are 8, 6, and 4. So they're a little bit more grown up. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But at the time, because time was really, I didn't have the resources on the time side to be able to sit back and do those group study sessions where you kind of spend 8 hours hanging out with each other and kind of studying. I had to be, really efficient with my study time. So I became really interested in lots of learning theories, things like spaced repetition, some concepts that people listening might be familiar with, the testing effect. And I began trying to integrate as many of those as I could into my practice, my studying. And then in med school, that became really important. But at that point too, and this kind of leads up to what led to SimTech and what I'm most interested in, is that you get hit with so much information in medical school. I tell people it's kind of like a fire hydrant gets turned on. You're trying to have a drink and it's a fire hydrant. And at that point, the systems kind of break down a little bit, and you go into survival mode in when you're going through that, where you just cram and study as hard as you can, pass the exam, forget. Because there's so much content. You could imagine you sit into one lecture and someone walks through 100 slides that are pretty dense in a 45-minute lecture, and you're like, what? And they have no clue where you're at in your educational training. They just walk down to the research lab and they're like, oh, just so you know, physiology, and they just start. And so it's chaos. Like,
and if I know anything about med students, everyone's half hungover and just been out too much the night before, and their brain is absolute mush on 3 hours sleep.
Now it depends on the med students. Again, I had a different experience because I was married and had kids at that point.
Yeah.
So I did miss out on some of the quote unquote fun, if that's your kettle of tea. But another way to think about the med students is that they're extremely driven. They're overachievers in a lot of ways for what they're trying to do. And so they're kind of that type A personality that tries to go above and beyond. And so it is a really challenging space as they transition from undergrad, where typically I was able to know all of the content. Like there was never a class that I was in where I was like, I don't know all the content. But then in med school, all of a sudden I had to accept that I wasn't going to know all the content and that I couldn't go above and beyond. And that was a really challenging thing for me, and I think for most of my peers at that point. Yeah, people are having fun, but we still have that desire. Yeah.
And they're not being able to know all the content. That's just because of the volume,
The sheer
and the
amount
amount of it, right?
Yeah.
There is no way you can know everything about the human body and everything that could possibly go right or wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. So the subject matter, most subject matters, in an undergrad are still pretty extensive. The difference is that think of medical student curriculum as this vaunted area where everyone wants to put their 2 cents into it. And there is almost no coordination. Someone will be furious at me saying that, but there's almost no coordination between what happens on a given subject throughout the whole subject and the coordination of that between the various subjects that you're learning. Because you're learning something like, 10 or so disciplines at any given time. It's centered in block-based systems where sometimes you're centered in cardio, but there's a whole bunch of themes that are running through that you're learning, and they're not talking with each other. And one pharmacology lecture is given by one professor, one by another. And so everyone's trying to put as much as they can into that med student brain. And they're not talking and saying like, I did 100, maybe they are back in the cafeteria. They're like, I put 110 slides. I put 130. Like maybe they are, and they're kind of laughing, but like, I doubt there's coordination on that side. And so it really just turns into something that's not manageable. And then the expectations get higher too as you start taking care of people. So,
Okay. And then, so how does that then progress? So then you finish med
Oh,
school.
oh yeah.
How long did that
No, really.
take
So it
you?
was during med school. So it was during med school, and so enough of these ideas of learning theories had been bumping around in my mind, and I'm going through and I'm having troubles applying them, and I'm trying to think: are there automated systems that we can begin using that can automate something like, again, I'll come back to it, spaced repetition, which is the idea that something you don't know, you should repeat more often. And as you learn something more often, you should repeat it less often. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But it becomes quite unmanageable when you start working with so much content to figure out what you know and don't know well. And so, there's these programs like Anki, they're flashcard programs. They're really interesting where they help you kind of memorize content like that.
Yeah.
I became really interested. Okay, what can we do to make this process more effective? And I became more interested in the process of how we take a naive medical student and turn them into a doctor than the actual practice. I really like clinical medicine. I love the investigative part of it. But for me, I started to become more and more interested in that. And I remember one particular day in clinic, looking at all my colleagues, and we're like talking about some particular challenging patient, and I thought, they've got this. Like, they're all incredibly interested in it. There's a whole apparatus that's built on taking people and turning them into healthcare professionals that can take care of patients. And I will return to that at some point. But for me, I was like, no one wants to talk with me amongst my peers about how can we make this better? Like, don't you notice that we don't do X, Y, and Z? Like, and we're a highly ranked med school. Why don't we do that? Like, we should have access to that.
No, and nobody wanted to talk to you about that. You were the only person that was like banging that drum.
Yeah, okay, and it makes sense because here's the thing: it's like if you start questioning the system as you're working your way through it, it's like, oh, do that at your own peril. Because if you're complaining about an exam and you're not spending time studying for it, then yeah, I mean, it's dangerous. And so most students were like, hey, I'm just going to put my head in the sand, which is a totally understandable response, and just hit the grind and get it done. And I'll look back on this later on and maybe do something if I really care. And that's okay. They just want to become a doctor. We just do. That's all we want to do.
Yeah.
But
Do you think that mentality though is why things don't change? Because people are so busy with just thinking, I want to get this grade, I want this to be done, I want to be a doctor, and then they don't even look back and think, man, why didn't we get taught differently, or why didn't we do this differently? Do you think that's maybe one of the reasons? Or
it definitely could be. I mean, medicine itself is a strange beast because it changes so slowly in some ways, and there's a good thing for that, a good reason for that. We don't want medicine to fly off the handle every time a new paper comes out, and we change practice, and we're trying to be safe. And so there's a good degree amount of caution that exists in the medical training and practice community. That said, I don't know. I say that you can't really control what you care about sometimes. You just care about something.
Yeah.
And if you're a person that does care about the educational process and you're just thinking, oh, I find myself complaining about it, and you don't want to just complain about that the rest of your life, then yeah, it's your responsibility to do that. But with my classmates, I don't know what all of their interests were. I know some of them, they've got a parent who's a surgeon in a particular field, and that's they don't care even about medical school per se, because they were always going to get into some med school somewhere and find their way until they're a surgeon and they're really interested in doing a particular thing in surgery. And so you can't fault them for not caring about that. But I am one of the ones that cares about the training process. And so for me, yeah, I would feel bad right now if I were out doing that and just letting med students go through, or anyone in that training space going through it without me trying to make the changes I saw. So it's tough to say why medicine in particular doesn't change quite as rapidly as other areas.
Because from my understanding, med school has a pretty bad rap in terms of health. Like, the people that are training to be doctors tend to be the most undernourished, underslept human beings on the planet, and tend to be sometimes like most of the unhealthiest people on the planet, telling people to be healthy. And it's probably no fault of their own, but just from the sheer workload that they have to go through. I always found that so strange.
Yeah, it's one of the great ironies. It's really funny. I mean, it's tragically sad in lots of ways, but
Yeah.
it's quite funny. And med school really only prepares them for the whatever country you're in, whether it's internship or residency, for the next progression in sleep deprivation. So yeah, so it's entirely true. and and I'm, I mean, it comes back to that. There's that, you've heard the saying where it's like, do I need to have had cancer to be a good oncologist? No, you don't. Like, you can learn about health and take care of people's health without being an expert in your health. That said, I do think there's something to the wise distribution of knowledge. You've got this medical knowledge. Patients come in and out through your clinic every day, and maybe if you're not seeing the progress that you'd hope that you'd see in those patients because they're not doing X, Y, and Z, which there's a lot of those things. We have treatments, but patients aren't doing them. We have health interventions, those things like eat what you don't want, do what you don't want to do, whatever the Mark Twain quote is. But we've got those things. And maybe, for what you're saying, if we were a little bit better in our personal lives with taking care of ourselves, maybe we would have more wisdom in helping our patients take care of their health. So hypothetically, especially with the metabolic syndromes that are becoming so predominant right now. And when I say metabolic syndromes, I mean just it's a consortium of symptoms. I'm by no means an expert in it, but in essentially it's what you're seeing that's contributing to lots of diabetes and heart failure and those types of conditions that are kind of chronic and progressive and that are lifestyle related. Yeah. And so it's a big problem. And maybe you're right. Maybe the way we're taking care of ourselves is contributing that.
Do medical students, I guess they probably don't have time to learn about nutrition and sleep. And I'm guessing you guys are super intelligent human beings. And this is the thing. And it's like,
oh, thank you.
Do you get taught? Because I there's no way I would have ever been able to be a medical profession ever. I just want to state that straight off. I would have no way ever been able to do that. But do people get taught about nutrition and sleep and exercise routines and how to quote unquote live healthy? Because surely that's what you're going to teach people, or at least prescribe to people.
Yeah. Yes and no. Because I mean, you're kind of falling into the trap that I mentioned earlier on, where med students are a really valuable resource for a society, right? They're going to become these people that are hopefully going to take care of your grandmas and grandpas and yourself one day.
Yeah.
So very valuable, but everyone wants to get their 2 cents in. And so you've just described another potential course that we could throw in too on top of that. And so now all of a sudden you've taken the fire hydrant by saying that, and you've just added a little bit more pressure to it. And so yes, we are taught some of those things. That said, I tell people I learned more about global warming than nutrition in med school. And whatever your stances are on those particular issues, I was a bit concerned about that personally, where I was like, I want more nutritional education personally, and for what I'm seeing as I enter the clinics. And so there are priorities that get set, and sometimes those priorities maybe don't mirror what's happening in society. I mean, happening with our patients.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, okay, I think we got a little bit sidetracked there with my strange question.
Yeah, so we were talking, did you want to go back to what led to the founding of the company?
Exactly. So talk me through that period of your life. Like obviously you showed an interest then in how people are trained, and you saw that there was an issue. What happened from there? What were your first steps of thinking, I think we could have something here?
Yeah. So it was playing around with a few ideas that I have rattling around in my mind I'm much more interested in the process of medical education and training than I am in the instrument of VR. VR itself is terrific. We can talk about that, but it's just a means to an end of training. So I played around with a few different ideas, and I was talking with my wife, of course, during this whole time, trying to figure out how much we wanted to commit to something like this. And ultimately it led to, okay, I'm going to do some development. So there was that moment that I had where I was like, my goodness, VR is a pretty safe way. I'm going to look in safe way of playing without being hurt. Can we look into this? And so I looked into it, saw where it was at. At that point in medicine, a no, at that stage in VR development, it was the Quest 2 that was out, which is Meta's most popular headset. And I looked into it. I was like, okay, that's pretty incredible. So I did a little bit of development on the side during med school, and I built a couple kind of just small prototypes. So essentially, you could take a block that was acting as a stethoscope, hold it over a patient's heart, and hear some heart sounds. So I did enough of that to show to some people and to get kind of some initial investment and some team of people around me. It started with kind of some, which I'm grateful for, but some cheaper indie development from some third world countries to kind of build out a little bit during that phase until post med school, when I was starting what would be called a residency, and decided at that point I can do this full time.
Yeah.
So that's when we shifted and went to full time.
Okay, cool. And then was then the next step to get investment? Was that then the next step? Think, okay, I've got to get some money together here to then actually build out a viable product.
And we did get some investment before I stopped medicine at that point. And so, yep. And so you do that, and that's friends and family, as people know, in that kind of round. And so, so you get some investment, start spending a little bit more on development. We got some kind of more North American developers, people with more experience in the VR space. And now we build everything in house. So the company's grown from there. Got an 8-person development team that fluctuates depending on needs here and there. But so then that's how essentially it was. Proof of concept, get something out in front of some customers, get something out in front of investors, and from there you're kind of growing your startup or trying to learn how to grow a startup.
Yeah, cool, very very cool. And you guys build everything in Unreal, right? And is that, or are you doing a little bit in Unity as well?
And we build everything in Unreal Engine, and it's an interesting thing to bring up right now. I don't know if you've seen the controversy that's happening with Unity right now.
Yeah. It's all over my newsfeed at the moment. So
it would be. Yep, exactly. So, at the time, I decided to start with Unreal Engine personally. I played around with Unity, played around with Unreal Engine. I think out of the box, Unity is a really terrific tool for VR, and probably better. At a certain point, when you're doing enough custom development, I think really the playing field is leveled between them. Both engines are capable of way higher resolution and graphic display than what the headsets can do. The headset and the genius of your developers trying to optimize for how it's operating are what help increase the quality. And so for us, we've stuck in with Unreal. That said, we feel a little bit validated right now that right now it would be a lot more expensive for our team if we had stayed with Unity, because for those not listening, there's a huge price change and everyone's furious because Unity was kind of the cheaper engine to a degree. And now out of the box, not really.
Yeah, well, I think they have a deal with Apple and their new Apple headset, and I don't want to say that might have influenced things maybe a little bit. I don't want to speculate, but
the timing's the timing's interesting. There's a few things going on right now. Like Apple's in the space, Epic Games, which is the company that builds Unreal Engine, just for people listening. So there's Epic Games, and Epic Games has a lawsuit with Apple right now. So Epic Games and Apple have a lawsuit. Apple partners with Unity. Unity increases the prices. What's going to happen with developers that are wanting to develop for the Apple but don't want to develop on Unity anymore? Especially if you're like a smaller, a few thousand a year to start building your game is a bigger cost than most developers have when they're doing it in their free time trying to build a game.
Yeah.
So the VR space it's a very hard startup space, I would say.
Yeah, very difficult. Well, I talk with, I would say, small VR development companies on the daily almost. Mm-hmm. And they have such small margins because they're hopping normally from project to project.
Yep.
And this will basically put a lot of them out of business, this one thing. Yep. And I don't know if that was even calculated by Unity, sorry. And they've probably lost so many customers from this, not just because they've put them out of business, but also because people are like, F you kind of thing. Like,
yeah, totally. And I don't know. Like, so for me, as I was watching, this is complete speculation because I haven't seen any profit loss statements. I don't think they're a publicly traded company. I think they're private, but I don't know what.
I think they're public.
They're public. Okay. So I wonder what kind of profits they were getting. Because for me, as I was looking at the business model, I thought, man, how is this sustainable? This is so cheap. Because Unreal Engine, what they do is that they more bank on their big projects and make money off of their big ones.
Yeah.
And they've got big projects, and they just take that 5% royalty and say that's how we're going to make our profits. It's off of that royalty, and they only really hit you once you get big. But as I was looking at the Unity model, I was like, they don't take from when you get big, and they're just taking this little subscription model. I'm like, how many developers do they have? There must be a lot more developers. I guess there's a ton
Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
using
Well,
that engine.
yeah. Like from what I know, from like SenseLove's side, I'm 99% sure we're like 80% of the people that use our product use gotta get them mixed up. Use Unity, not Unreal. But I can see that being a big shift the other way now. Big shift.
Yeah. So the combination so I'm happy we're alive right now as a company and in a good phase where we're starting to get more commercial traction. So that said, I should say, like, I've talked to founders, and maybe you've had more talks with this with people in the VR space. The combination of Meta trying to figure their stuff out right now, and then this Unity must be a huge blow to the community, because as an example, Meta, so there's several tiers, just like with the Apple's App Store. There's, I think, Flight Test is the pre-app store, Apple Store. So there's Flight Test. I'm getting that wrong, maybe, but then there's the Apple Store, and there's a few layers of approval that you can get through there. For us, when we applied to the App Labs for Meta or Facebook, it's supposed to be a 5-week review. It took about 7 months for them to look at the project.
Whoa.
So if you think about it, you can't monetize your product until you get those approvals. There's constraints on that. And so I know a founder that I talked with who was just like, yeah, we had a few apps developed that we wanted to, and then we just couldn't monetize them. So we just closed shop. So yeah. So it's, and plus you're trying to explain to investors that, people will buy this thing, I promise. And you can't get that data. It's a little bit harder. So it has been a real challenge navigating it. That said, I don't think the app space on the VR side is going to be too crazy going into the future. There's already like some pretty established standards from the Google store, and then the Android stores essentially, and Apple over the last number of years. And Meta seems to be just falling into line with those policies. So I think it's going to get better. They've been more responsive with us lately, but yeah, it's hard space.
I can imagine that is an extremely difficult space to be in. But you touched on like the commercial aspects of Simtech. So like, how's that going? Are you guys, I know I've noticed that you guys are doing more in terms of your marketing now. You're doing stuff on YouTube, stuff like that. Is that kind of the avenue you're going down, more branding and marketing than more like direct sales?
Okay, great. So we've got a few things going on that side. One, we're slightly different than most medical education companies in that our primary customer is medical students. It's not medical institutions. We are starting sales to medical institutions, and that's the groups that we're really looking to partnership with putting haptic gloves like SenseGlove onto our software. And so that's fun. We're looking forward to that. We're starting to have more meetings in that space, but we're doing less. On the medical student side, yes, we're trying to more build community, truly, essentially around our product. Our product, we haven't talked much about it, but essentially what it is it's a clinical skills trainer in virtual reality. So you put on the headset, you're surrounded by a virtual world where you can interact with virtual patients in the same way that I would when I'm in a real clinic. So reach out, grab a pulse. I'm reaching out. I'm seeing a virtual hand as it moves towards that. I'm grabbing a controller, but my eyes see a patient's hand, and I'm feeling a vibratory pulse coming through the controller back. So it feels very intuitive and natural for people that haven't had that experience. Mm-hmm. So we are training on clinical skills, not surgical skills. So that's histories, physical exams, bedside procedures, those types of things. The things every doctor does every day in every country. That's what we say.
Yeah.
So that's what we're building right now, what we have. For us, we want to build the tools for that, and then really empower a generation of online educators and medical students who want to connect on the platform and train in a learning community. And so that's part of our outreach on YouTube, is connecting with medical students in a variety of ways, both related to our product, but also just general medical education. We do direct sales where we do advertising on Meta. So Meta basically on Facebook and Instagram, where we can
Mhm.
find medical students and sell directly to them. So that is starting on a commercial side now.
Okay, interesting. And then, so are you relying on the medical students to have a VR headset then? So, or is that something that they can use at university?
So there's two situations. The most common one is that medical students will purchase a VR headset.
Mhm.
For those who aren't keeping track of prices, the VR headsets are now about $299 USD for a phenomenal. We're talking about standalone VR, so you don't need a PC computer or a gaming computer to hook this up to. So it's about $299, which I paid for more expensive textbooks, so that's not the worst.
I was going to say that bookcase behind me, two of those books on there I actually got them from the US and they cost me like 250 euros. So the VR headsets, they're worth it though. They're worth it. I promise. I hope so.
Good.
But sorry, carry on.
100 million leads. Is that from Alex?
Alex Hormozy, yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm like the big fanboy of Alex Hormozy, and like
Hey, why not?
anybody that's listened to the podcast probably would know that by now because I normally can't spend around 10 minutes without talking about him. So
Yeah, if you talk to someone over 10 minutes, you've mentioned Alex. So okay, what do you like? Tell me. I'm just getting exposed to some of his content now in the space. Yeah.
I'm just working my way through $100 million leads. So his first book, $100 million offer, is basically how to make a grand slam offer where people feel stupid to say no. That's basically what the book's all about. And he covers a whole different soup of what people need to hear and need to have in front of them for them to say yes to you. And it breaks into like lots of different things of you're testing me here, that they basically need to have a very low barrier to entry. So you need to basically check off all these things. And he's a big guy that's just like, in sales, marketing, you have to learn by doing. So like volume, and you actually have to work. Where I feel like a lot of these self-help books, they tend to like trick you into thinking that you don't have to work that hard. And he's like, oh, no, you have to work like 15 hours a day, every single day, trying to do something for like 2 years, and then you might get good at it.
So that's the part that's resonated with me that I've come across recently, where there's kind of like a no holds back, no BS kind of that I'm picturing on his side, where so often it's like how to make X number of, and that's never been my experience. I mean, I know there are people that do that. It's also not a very meaningful process to me. So the process of the hard work, and that's what's fun about founding a company, is that you have to do everything essentially, unless you're in a hotter market where you get large amounts of funding early on and you can kind of outsource that. As a CEO, you're really just a video editor, you're a social media marketer, you're all those things, right? So you're not real in that sense.
Truth.
But
that is the truth.
But the hard work and the confidence that comes from that is just, I think it's really why investors do look for someone with previous founding experience at times, because you have an idea of what goes into it and you develop so many skills in that process. And it really is just like the work that no one else is going to do, that you've got to get done, and it has to get done. So I like that part about his mentality. It's
I could literally talk about it forever. He's like, if you haven't read those two books, you've got to just give them a chance and read them, because they've saved me so much time and effort, like just that I would have had just struggling through trying to figure it out myself. And he's a very good writer as well, or he has a very good person that writes his books. I'm not sure, but
he's a good communicator, so he's probably a decent writer. But
exactly. But let's dive back into the product then. So I've seen like a lot of the videos that you guys do, and so why do you guys use controllers and not hand tracking, for example? Is that just because it's an early phase of development, or is that because you want to feel the haptics from the controller, or what was the main reason behind that? Because I feel like I personally much prefer hand tracking. Like whenever I use VR, I really prefer hand tracking. If that's an option, are you guys going to have that as an option at some point?
We are. It'll depend. And so one, practically speaking, hand tracking wasn't really a thing when we started. So at that point, yes, it does allow for a little bit more functionality with the buttons. Hey, just as a quick pause, can you hear a sound in the background?
No.
Okay, no worries, good. Okay, so yeah, practically speaking, hand tracking wasn't around. That said, it provides a little bit more functionality. I know they're figuring some things out on the continuous movement side, like if you want to for locomotion with the hand tracking, but we do need to move around a little bit. As well, you are using instruments decently often, and so if you don't have haptic gloves with force feedback, then at that point we do want to feel some of the objects that we're using. And so right now for the user experience, it doesn't seem to be. I don't think it would be. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 5% better of a more intuitive experience to hop in there with hand tracking. But right now, that's where we're at. I see us going in that direction as hand tracking gets better, or as haptic gloves just become more accessible. Like I picture medical students purchasing a VR headset and haptic gloves when they tell their mom they want to be a medical student, a doctor one day. And I don't think that's that unreasonable with how things are going. Like you guys, your prices dropped a ton. And one of our lead game designer, Dr. Sasha Godfrey, she did work on in the rehabilitation space using haptic gloves. And they used to just be outrageously expensive. And so the prices are going in the right direction. So that's really that is ultimately where we want to be is haptic gloves with the VR. So the combination of those things.
Yeah, I feel like at some point in the future, every VR headset will come with a haptic device. I actually think personally that Meta will bring out their own version very, very soon. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's next year that they come out with some low-level haptics. I don't think it'll have force feedback. I think it'll just be some vibro tactile and hand tracking.
I've seen a little bit of video leaks
itself.
from Reality Labs. You've seen some of those video leaks from Reality Labs?
Yeah. That's a really cool glove, but they're basically using the microfluid technology that haptics have had for ages. There was a bit of a PR storm with that when that happened, but
exactly. And some of this stuff's been around, and I think one of the questions Sense Glove's asking, and lots of people are asking in the space, is just who's going to commercialize to the B2C market, the direct to customer market first.
Yeah. Have you tried B Haptics? Because they have a really cheap. I say really cheap. It's like $200.
No, I haven't.
Vibro glove. I tried it. It was pretty cool. Like
really,
it feels cheap, but it feels like a cheap, like oversized glove. But it works. You know, it tracks the fingers. It vibrates. It does like what you'd expect a vibro glove to do. So yeah. I was pretty impressed, but I imagine that at some point they'll all come with a haptic device.
Yeah. So that's the question. It's like, okay, so with our development resources right now, there's a lot. Okay, so our pathway for what we're building is pretty huge, and so for us, we have something functional right now. We want to get to some of these landmarks. It's like, what's going to improve the product more? Maybe if Apple's Vision Pro comes out and people are loving this user experience and enough users, I think they're only projected to get around 300,000 to like 500,000 sales next year on that. And so, with that size of market, it's not big enough for us optimizing for it yet. And so if that starts to happen, then we're definitely going to shift in that direction, because I'm all about those first few moments in VR being as intuitive as possible. Because I think if a person has a good first experience like that, they start to realize that, okay, what I see on YouTube or wherever it is that they've seen some VR, that's not what it's like when you put the headset on. Because when you put the headset on and you start doing intuitive movements, at that point, your brain is very tricked. You are. And that's the reason that you see people in those hilarious YouTube videos running into TVs, running off, hitting couches, punching people. All those funny things that you see is because it's real when you're in there.
Yeah. Like we actually, side note, we actually have a new demo where you basically go onto, I don't know what we call it, like it's a lift basically. You have to go fix a light bulb at a very top of a factory. And even though you're in VR and you're in VR, you're wearing a headset, you can actually walk to the end of the platform and fall off. But you physically, to get yourself to try and walk off that plank is so difficult because you're like, no, but I'm gonna fall and die.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
it's crazy.
It's really incredible. And I mean, so that's an interesting point. I mean, I talked with your colleague Jordan about this, how it is so surprising. And that was one of my first experiences. I bumped into a person that I knew from church, and they had this this VR headset, tried it on. This is around the time these ideas were rambling around in my mind. And after that first experience that I had, where I was panicking, trying to look for a gun in this scenario as people were shooting at me, I just remember like just the terror of that. And I knew, I was like, whoa. And sometimes people look at they're like, it looks like Second Life 2. But I mean, like, our characters, we recently put metahumans in. I don't know if you've seen any videos of
Yeah, I've seen
metahumans
the
yet.
videos. They look cool.
Anyways, they're digitally, I think they're phenomenal. They're heavy. They're hard to work with. So props to the development team. But you don't need that to feel like, you talk, you say something to our patients, they move. You reach out and grab the stethoscope, put it over the chest, or try and palpate a region, you feel it. So at that point, you're kind of hooked. So it's fascinating. And yeah.
And I keep coming back to the point of like, why do people dislike medical VR training so much? Because I see a lot of let's say like influencers in the VR space, and I think they mean surgical training when they talk about medical training. And I think there's a very big distinction from what you guys are doing to, doing an open heart surgery in VR. And I think we touched upon this in our first call a couple of weeks ago, how people think that when you're trained in VR, they're just hopping from a VR headset onto a actual human when they've just been in a car crash or something. Can you like shed some light on what actually happens?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's two things that are going on with sometimes people like that. One, they haven't experienced VR. If you haven't experienced VR, you don't quite know. The second part is they're comparing what they hope medical training is like in their mind to what they think can happen in VR. So there's that utopia that they're picturing, and then there's what really happens in medical training. And if you compare VR training to what really happens in training and becoming a doctor, then yeah, it's a monstrous improvement in so many ways. So like as an example, how can I start with this? I'll start with because there's a number of people who have problems in this space. One is the medical students problem. So they need to learn their clinical skills. For people who don't know, clinical skills are, again, those histories, physical exams, procedures, but they're more like a gymnast routine than anything else. It's a set of 20 to 40 steps that you practice again and again and again so that you don't think about it. And when you take a medication history, you always ask about particular allergies and those types of things. When you do a physical exam, I do it in a very structured manner. You start from the end of the bed, you move through the hands, you move your way up, you look, feel, touch, move. There's all these mantras that we say as we go through to help ourselves remember every single step. And you have to practice those again and again to get competent. And that's just to get the procedural memories down. Then imagine that you're doing those same activities that you've practiced hundreds of times, so now you're competent at them. Then you start adding little mysteries as you move up the body. You assess the hands and you're like, oh, tar-stained fingers. Interesting. They smoke. You get up, and so you're gathering data as you go, and you're like, oh, some abnormal beats. And so now you've got to add the intuitive reasoning that you're doing as you do a clinical assessment until you work your way through it. That all of the things I've just described can be done in virtual reality. And right now, the medical student, to get that practice, they're mostly practicing on a pillow.
Really?
Like that's one of the most common things that we hear medical students practicing on, a pillow. I practiced on nothing. I would hold my step. I would put a chair in front of me. I would practice. Sometimes I would convince my wife to let me do a few physical exams on her. I'll keep things PG. Just kidding. No, but it's the joke. It's like, if you're going to practice with a fellow med student, you better be dating them. It's uncomfortable quickly. So, but effectively, it's really hard to get that experience practicing on people. There's another saying that we use in medicine that it's called C1 do one, teach one.
Mm.
And basically what the underlying theme of that saying that we would use is you only need to really see one to go and try one and then to do another one. And that's incredibly dangerous. If you think about the implications of that, like I remember I was talking with the doctor who said he was about to stitch up a lady, and she says, it was his first time ever, his first stitch ever. And she
That's my
says,
worst nightmare.
have you done this before? Because she could tell that he was nervous. And he says, yeah, right, exactly. And he says, would it make you feel better if I said, I've done this thousands of times? And she's, yes. He said, I've done this thousands of times. and that like that interaction, like to me, it represents like the tacit agreement that we have between training health professionals and the patient population. And we appreciate that we're allowed to practice because we have to practice. But it's dangerous. And there's this growing movement, which is good for patient safety, because I don't know if you were aware of this, but like medical errors are the third leading cause of death in the USA. I think maybe fourth, and other developing countries are in a very similar place. And so there's this drive and movement towards patient safety. But as you do that, as you enhance patient safety, especially in the training area, you're reducing physician experience or medical student experience. So you are, in a sense, making the physician more dangerous, hypothetically, as they become more safe, as you focus on patient safety. Yeah. So there's this terrible tension between this, where it's like, I'm reading some historical medicine right now, and these physicians, man, the father of modern day surgery, John Hunter, man, that guy was able to do anything day one. He was just cutting into people, gave himself syphilis. The things he was doing were just like completely unethical as he studied and tried to become competent. So he obviously was just, playing at an incredible and learning so rapidly because of that play. Is you introduce boundaries and safety, that's good for the patients, but what happens to the learning, right? Mm-hmm. And so as medical students are sitting back and watching more medicine, that's dangerous too. And so we've got this situation where medical students, like, they need experience practicing those clinical skills. They can't get experience on patients. Sim labs that are trying to be set up by universities are they're a really hard system to function within. That's a very expensive system. Okay. And then we've got that tension. So that tension where, so if you're comparing it to the real world, where, just to put a bow on that, if you're comparing to the real world and how training actually happens, like those times where I would try and find a person to sign off on a form who had never seen me practice, and they were saying, yeah, this person's competent. They'd never once seen me. Which is, concerning, but they're busy. Like, they're taking care of so many patients. The demand is huge, but they've never seen me. Versus the other physician, you start day one of rotation and they say, in kindness, man, I'll sign anything you put in front of me because I remember how hard med school was or training was. I'll sign anything you put in front of me. And both of those scenarios are not ideal for the patient. And so if we can have a VR where if you compare to reality, then VR is a terrific environment for learning those clinical skills.
And then where are you guys looking to take this then? Because how many different types of training do you currently have, and what is the vision looking like as you move forward then?
Yeah. So what we have right now is, what we've been building really is scalable humans. So scalable humans that I can do all of the interactions on that I would do in a real patient. So right now we've got about 143 unique clinical interactions. And so if I were to, essentially, we've covered most of the things that I would do if I were working in an emergency department tomorrow. I can do most of those interactions with the patient in the VR game. That leads to us having, so then once you build up the interactions, the creations of scenarios on top of them becomes a lot easier. So right now we can make scenarios as rapidly as we want to prioritize them. But it's not, so essentially, we have a lot of unique interactions. Okay, not right now, bud. Okay.
Say hi for me.
Yeah, that is my youngest, named Russell. He's terrific. He's the funniest kid. Ever since he was 6 months old, he just started making jokes as like a 6 month. He's just hysterical. Okay, so right now we've got those 143 will probably hit 200, maybe end of this year or something like that. But then we've got about 25 or 30 scenarios on top of that. We can add scenarios really rapidly now, but really it's kind of getting into like where we're going into the future. We are not in the business of I call it like the information dilemma that we're all running into, which is the situation that like learning tools traditionally, it's like their mission has been, I don't know whether it's something that was driven by investors or by learners. Everyone just wanted more content. They're just like, give me more content. The more content, the better. Please, you go into these. I would sign up for these test banks or these question banks that I would use in med school. And you sign on, you start doing some questions. Like, great, did 20 questions today. And it's like 20 out of 10,000 questions done. And you're like, have I made progress? Like, I don't know. Right? So, and it's been the case for however many years now that we've had more information that we can possibly learn in the world. And so really we're trying to ask a different question, which is not like how much content can we make, but it's like, how can we help people navigate the information they need to learn as effectively as possible?
Yeah.
And that's a really fun question, and it involves a lot more features than just, which is why we integrate AI. We're trying to use a number of different resources to help people, because what we want to be is the thing that can take someone from that moment where they say, I'm thinking about being a doctor, or I like watching medical soap operas. Maybe I should try this out. Whatever it is, they start at that phase, and we can take them all the way up to full competence, or at least to the point where, again, what I see in the future is that you start in VR, your time in VR shrinks as your time with real patients expands. And so the question of navigating information is a really fun one. And that's really where we're going more in the long term.
I heard you say that you're not looking to eliminate physical training. Like, that's not what you're trying to do with your company. You're just trying to facilitate where it's needed to be, right? That is, I think I butchered what you said, but I heard it on one of your videos, and you just nailed it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think what I said was, we're not looking to replace physical clinics. Yeah, because there are things that you have to learn with patients. But if you have ever had an interaction with a med student and you've thought they're really awkward, the reason they were so awkward is because they were running through 15 kind of processes and 20 facts in their head at the same time. And that's why they were like stumbling and bumbling around as they tried to talk with you, because they've got so much going around. And so what we're trying to do is make the most effective use of their time. And they spend years learning information independent of clinical practice. And then we go and we put them into a clinic, and all of that information has to be restructured, relearned in a different way. You formatted with wrong associations. So we're trying to have all of that happen in a valid learning environment. And that's what we see virtual reality as we go into clinics. I know we're probably getting close on time, but yeah.
Yeah. I was just looking at the time. I know we both got a little bit of a hard stop, but last question then before we end. So what are you currently doing with AI into your trainings, and like, can you give any like sneak peek on how you're utilizing AI? It's a hot topic.
So yeah, one of the things that we do is we have not very many products right now have speech integration, so we can communicate directly with our patients. And so you can talk with them in a manner that I'm talking with you now. It's not quite that smart, but it's getting pretty good. And so you can talk with it, making it more intuitive and helping that skill transference from virtual clinic to real clinic. But the part that we're more excited about is what we're calling our smart feedback system. But essentially this means that when students enter, they don't need to decide anymore, what do I need to learn today? The AI is saying, we know what you've learned, we know what you need to learn, and we're going to help you navigate that space. And that's such a fun area. And that's why sometimes I say what we're building is immersive AI, because we're looking to integrate all of the learning theory that we've established over the last 20 years, but it's so tough to implement into a med school, within that curriculum. We're trying to implement all of that in automatically. So when people enter a product called, or a location called My Clinic, they just enter and they can trust the clinic that it's going to train them. And so that's a really fun space. Yeah.
Cool. Well, look, we're coming up to the 1 hour mark, and I want to say thanks for your time because you could have chosen to be anywhere. So I appreciate that you were here with me. Where can people find out more about you, your company, and where can we go and support you and check out what you're doing?
Yeah, practically, simtechmd.ca is kind of the parent website, but our biggest project is MedValley. So medvalley.io, that is the product that we sell direct to medical students. And so go check it out. Go check out our socials. We're on YouTube. YouTube and Instagram are where most of the medical students are. So that's where we are. But yeah, come check out. We're always interested in people who have partnerships or just want to learn more about the space.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hey, thanks, David. Terrific.
No worries. Thanks, man.
Okay. See ya.